Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Dr. Alan Weisser. He is a chronic pain mastery expert and an author. Welcome to the show, Dr. Alan.
Thank you and good morning.
Good morning. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are talking right now. We'll be talking about mastering chronic pain. But before we get to this, Dr. Allen, if you can tell a bit more about yourself, a bit about your journey uh, to this point of that you are writing a book, which we'll obviously talk about in the show.
Okay. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. I would say that what I do now started with me at age 12 and a half. If you looked at the book, you know that at the age of 12 and a half, I broke my neck. And just to give you a little bit of background, as a child, I was headstrong and risk-taking and curious. And so I decided I wanted to learn how to do trick diving on a diving board. And I would start with a backflip. But I wasn't going to take lessons. I thought I could figure it out for myself, right? Did you know when you do a backflip on a diving board, you're supposed to dive out from the board, not straight up? So I came down on the board. I broke my neck in two places. Here's where it becomes increasingly relevant. So picture at 12 and a half, I'm sitting in the hospital with a cast on my neck. The doctor comes in and he says, if you don't die and you're not paralyzed, you will be crippled for the rest of your life. This is my introduction to mortality and vulnerability. And as a result of that, I was 3 years in recovery. I didn't die and I wasn't paralyzed, but I was on my back in a brace for a year, not allowed to get out of bed or move around. It took me months to walk again because I was so atrophied. So that was the beginning of me understanding what I do now, because in those days, you wouldn't have known that I was frightened or upset. I would make jokes and act like it's okay and not a big deal. I didn't even allow myself to know how I felt. And that carried forward. I almost flunked out of high school, even though obviously I'm intelligent enough to make it through high school. I've got two PhDs. But in those days, I thought I was stupid. And why? Because of what happened. My reaction to hearing the doctor's comment was that I thought I must have been really stupid to try what I did. So a lot of that resonated throughout the rest of my life and eventually was resolved. But what I didn't do was focus on anything other than the physical injury. It was a broken neck. It needs to heal. Do what the doctors say. Did not pay any attention to the existential impact. I did not pay attention to the impact it had on me as a person. And that's going to be extremely important in terms of what I do now, because that was the beginning of me understanding you have to look at the whole person. When you're talking about injury or disease or any other chronic anything, any kind of chronic suffering, if you want to help the person, you need to look at the total person. So throughout high school, I didn't try and do anything, no sports, nothing risky. I thought if I turned my head the wrong way, my head would fall off. By the time I got to college, I was just kind of fed up with it. It was so contrary to my nature, right? So what do you think I did to try and check to see if the doctors were right? I'll
Right.
tell you the answer. You could guess any kind of answer. I signed up for judo and trampoline, right? I figured if I was going to find out, I'd find out. And I still remember the first throw with my instructor throwing me towards the ground and knowing if I hit that ground, I could be dead, paralyzed, or maybe okay. Bottom line is I was okay. And I've always been okay. And found out many years later that, unknown to anybody, my neck had experienced a natural fusion, which is why it wasn't structurally weak. But that took many years to find out. The point is, I went against advice. I went against the grain. It could have ended very badly. But it's one of the reasons why I don't assume that what physicians tell people is necessarily the only way to look at things. Definitely respect it. I respect the medical profession, but There's lots of situations that I've encountered where people are told they can't do any better, get any better, and then they do. So that led to me initially becoming an attorney. And even as an attorney, I wanted to help people who didn't seem to have a voice, who didn't really understand what they were dealing with legally. Eventually, that led through a number of personal experiences to me deciding to become a psychologist. And initially, I spent many years working with the chronically mentally ill, about 10 of those in the state mental hospital in New York, which is where I'm from. At some point, I decided it was time to move on from that. Wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, so I took a part-time job as a psychologist at a pain management clinic. Didn't know anything about pain management, but I was a good therapist. But what I discovered working with the chronically mentally ill is you don't treat the psychosis, you treat the person's life. Because a person who's psychotic and hospitalized, their whole life is crashed. So I got into this habit of looking at people holistically, treating them holistically, every angle possible to help restore life. That recovery is really based on restoring life. Whether they'll cure psychoses at some point, hopefully. But in the short run, it's more about evolving and adapting to the challenges that presents. So I kind of came out of it with that mindset. Look at this holistically, treat the life. The problem is in the person's life, not just in their body or in their mind. That worked well. And when I came into chronic pain, I'm looking at these patients and I'm going, they're not psychotic, but they have another life altering event going on. And over the years, began to see how many things could be impacted, the things I refer to as collateral damage. So, for example, if you have back injury, you may lose physical conditioning, you may become deactivated, you may lose all kinds of things, right? And then those things can actually come back and create more stress and impact on your pain and how much you can recover. So the concept of looking at this lens, if you want to understand what's going on with a person who's suffering, physical or emotional, look at it through an existential lens. What that means is, I want to know more than you lost your job. I want to know what it means to you that you lost your job. I want to know what it means to you that your marriage broke up, not just that it happened. And too much of the treatment with chronic pain is based on events, not on meaning. And meaning is at the heart of what I do because in that you get down to who the person really is and what really matters. So essentially, that eventually developed into building a model because the clinic that I worked in had a very nice model, but it was top down, two dimensional, and really didn't produce any significant alterations. The approach that I began to take became increasingly important. And then in the context of that, I discovered something I had no idea existed. Something we call the existential immune system. So think about this. We've been around for millions of years, at least in some form. You would think over millions of years we would have developed a way of coping and adapting to the environment that's superior, right? But we walk around as humans acting as if we don't have that or don't even know it exists. So that existential immune system is what gets tapped into to be able to help a person recover. Everybody we've ever seen that we're inspired by, who overcomes the impossible, whether they know it or not, they're tapping into that. Right? The heart of that is inspiration and self-love, but there's a lot of tools built into the system that people don't even know they have. They don't know that emotions are actually tools. And thinking is a process that has to be used carefully because a lot of kinds of thinking, forms of thinking are actually counter to evolution. So I could spend hours continuing to go on to that, but that's the journey led to not only me working with these patients and helping them. I've seen over 2,500 patients, chronic pain patients in the last 20 years, but actually coming up with a way of approaching this in a form of therapy that is unique and incredibly impactful. And I say that as with humility. I mean, I've been well trained. I went through 15 years of psychoanalysis. The approach I use actually produces those same outcomes in one third of the time because it taps into the essential, it taps into the existential. So, in summary, that's kind of the approach.
Right, right, Dr. Allen. Now, to understand it from a common person's perspective,
Right.
how should they understand pain? As some people uh, suffer from the same impact much more strongly, others are able to bear it. And it's both for physical as well as emotional pain.
Right.
How would you like to help us, as a common person, understand it? Why does it happen that way?
Okay. Well, there are some conditions that are persistent. I don't use the word chronic anymore because chronic suggests lifelong, but certainly persistent. When it comes to physical pain, you and I both know this, everybody knows that it's not a uniform reaction. If I'm a police officer or a soldier and I get shot, I may keep on fighting. Right? I'm a martial artist. I can take a lot of pain that most people would be stopped dead in their tracks on because I don't experience it the same way. Right? The soldier and the police officer doesn't experience it the same way. So a lot of what happens with pain has to do with how you encounter it. And there is no one way to react to it. And for example, what's really interesting, I will often counsel patients to meditate on their pain instead of avoiding it and moving away from it. I tell them to actually get into a meditative state and focus on the pain. Get into the experience of the pain. Do you know what happens within the first few minutes when you do that? Pain goes down. Interesting, right? Why is it going down? Because you're reassuring your psyche. Yeah, it's hurting. We're paying attention. If we choose not to, your psyche's going like, what are you doing? Right? Pain's telling you there's something wrong. You should go do something, right? So, small example though of a way to demonstrate to people that you don't have to experience pain the way you do. Another aspect of meditating on it, you find that it's not constant. It's like Morse code, dots and dashes. Most people experience pain as a uniform. It's always hurting. It's going on and on and on. It's actually not true. So that's just a small sampling, but there's so many things that influence. Genetics influences it, experience influences it, your own association with pain growing up and going through your life. Multi-determined. So I can say to people, I don't know that you have to have that level of pain and suffering. What I do know that is the more we explore this and we get into what's going on around it, and the more we intervene to help you have a feeling that your life is not over. The mastery element, by the way, is it's not about not necessarily having pain. It's about not having the pain run your life. That's the mastery, that you're not run by the pain anymore. So while it may be difficult to intervene physically and do anything more than what can be done for a person, there's no limit to how far a person can evolve and adapt into a person who's tapping into their full potential. And that potential, we all know how many people in history have changed everything. Human potential, right? Da Vinci, human potential. I go down the list, Einstein, right? This is an expression. People think, well, that's a unique person. To some extent, that's true, but the ability to transcend and to go beyond, that's within all of us. So that message starts to resonate with people. They go like, all right, I didn't understand the mystery in pain. I didn't know what the heck was going on and why it's so problematic. Well, you showed me those collateral damages. So I get, okay, there's a lot of other things I'm not being treated for. That's going to add to my problem. And then I go, well, the mastery is tapping into the tools of the existential immune system, which are essentially feelings and thinking and all the things that are implied behind that. So that's why people begin to go like, and my patients will say this within the first 2 or 3 months. I don't know if I have any less pain, but I don't feel the same way about it. And because I don't feel the same way about it, it changes everything.
Right, right, Dr. Allen. Now, when does any pain become chronic? Is it because of the pain, the type of pain it is, that because if you've got hurt someone somewhere and it has not healed enough, then it will pain? But some people put it so much into their minds that whenever they think of that particular pain, it becomes a hindrance for them. So, but I want to understand, when does it become chronic? Because of the quality of pain, or is it because the way we understand it for ourselves? And is it also for, again, emotional pain? People keep on rewinding the same thing, and that keeps on, so in one pain, you say, you go deep into it, and then your body will say, if you try to forget it, the body will say, listen, what are you doing? In the emotional pain, does it work the same way? So help us understand about how should we understand our pain, the chronicness of the pain that one suffers.
Yeah, like I said, I'd use the word persistent, but there's a lot of physical conditions. If you have degenerative disc disease, if you have herniations, there are certain conditions that change the structure and make it more susceptible to irritation. So it persists. There are a lot of medical conditions that once you have them, they may be treatable, but they will persist. You have diabetes, you can treat it, but it's persistent on other kinds of things. So there's just certain conditions that for the moment. But of course, my counterpoint to that is that may be true today, but with medical science advancing as rapidly as it is, who knows? When I started this work, there was no such thing as an artificial disc for your back. Now there is. There's tremendous work being done. So I say to my patients, even if your physical condition can't be cured at the moment, what you really want to do is sustain your life. In the meanwhile, you want to be in a position to benefit from that. And in the short run, if it's persistent, that's just because we haven't figured out how to undo it. With emotional suffering, I would say that is in the realm of the curable. No matter what the condition may be, some more resistant than others. People who are psychotic, it's not that easy to become not psychotic. But you can also help the person have a life. And that is the key to this. Sure, you may have persistent suffering emotionally or physically. You'll do what you can to address that and deal with it. But what you really want to do is feel empowered. You want to feel like you haven't lost your life. You haven't lost your purpose and meaning in life. When people have that, when they feel inspired to continue, Stephen Hawking, right? I don't get it. I would love to have been able to speak to the man and go like, how did you do what you did? You were trapped in a chair from the time you were in your 20s and you become the world's greatest physicist and you have a sense of humor and you show up on The Simpsons. I mean, how do you do that? I don't know. I never spoke to the man. But it says to me, it's possible. It's possible. When I chose to take judo to test my doctors, I was going, maybe it's possible that they're wrong. Maybe it's possible. It doesn't always work out. When people start losing the sense of possibility, they come up with no opportunity. When you start embracing the idea that something is possible, you know this, then who knows what's going to come forward. So I'm trying to inspire people not to be focused on their pain or suffering so much, but on how not to have it steal their life. And that is very doable. So even if you have that, another part of this, and you're making a really good point on this one, is paying attention, right? If I say to a patient, how often are you paying attention to that pain each day when you're feeling it? They'll go like, well, pretty much all the time. I personally have chronic pain with lower back problems. I don't pay any attention to it because I know what it is. You know, you ever had tinnitus or know anybody who's had it, the ringing in the ears?
Yes.
William Shatner, Captain Kirk, I don't know if you know the story, but he had it in both ears and ended up in a hospital, a mental hospital. It made him crazy. But if you don't pay attention to it, you don't hear it. So a lot of this has to do with what you're doing in your head with this, where you're putting your attention. For example, I tell patients, do not think about the future and the what ifs or the past and that suffering unless it serves you in the moment. All right. This idea of living in the present, being here now, well, that's a real thing. Right? I personally have that discipline where I don't engage in thinking that does not serve me. And that doesn't mean I avoid unpleasant truth, but I don't dwell on those things if it serves no purpose. I don't drag my suffering from the past along with me into the present. It's done. It's in the past. It's only in my memory. This approach is complicated in a lot of ways, but also essentially simple. It's tapping into all the tools that evolution has provided you with and using them at optimal level. But most of my patients in this country have serious problems with suppressing their emotions and using the kinds of thinking that is not useful, like rationalizations, assumptions, judgmental thinking. So a lot of it is looking at this and saying to people, you got an operating system, a way of coping that was well enough designed for maybe your youth or your early years, but now you're up against something it's not ready for. Like COVID, right? Who is ready for that? So I say to people, you're not broken, you don't need to be fixed, but you have some non-user friendly features in your coping system that are not working at this point. So you need to evolve. You need to be 2.0. The notion of evolving as a person and enhancing your ability to cope. Because think about this, we go through life. What are the odds we're not going to encounter more and more and more challenges, more and more serious challenges, right? But we're designed to evolve. We're designed to adapt. You know how people, when they get to a certain age, get to be old? Old is not a physical act. Old is a existential choice, right? Because how many people do we know that have lived to a very old age and remain vital? Do you know Gladys McLeary, Dr. Gladys McLeary? Have you ever met her? This is a woman who's a doctor who's 103, who is doing a lot of podcasts right now, who wrote 2 successful books in her 90s, and she's one of the founders of holistic medicine. So what's her story? How does she choose to be a person who thrives up to 103? And why watch people in their 60s becoming what we call old? It's all about choice, right? You and I know this. Everybody knows this. The greatest human gift is we have choice. We can choose what we think. We can choose how we act. But remember, thinking and feeling are determined by perception. Perception is determined by awareness. If you're not aware, the way you look at things is going to be quite different. Consider how you saw the world at age 5 versus 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. It's different. This approach that we work with people on changes awareness. They go, oh, I have power. I have this existential immune system. I have this toolkit. I didn't know I had any of that. And then they start using it and everything changes. And they begin to see, I've got potential. I've got power. Even if I have chronic suffering of some kind, I have a counterpoint. I have a way of pushing back. I have a way of maintaining control of this. So you're absolutely right, though. There's individual differences. Everybody has to be treated unique to who they are in their own story. So that's kind of the general way of approaching this idea about what do you do? Why is pain persistent? Kind of what do you do to offset that? A lot of it is a question of balance. That while you may not be able to stop the physical suffering because it's a structural issue, there is no end to what you can do in terms of how you experience what's going on.
Right, right, Dr. Allen. Now, you talked about everything is possible, a lot is possible. So, and in your case, the physician said something else, then you did your own thing. For the general people, how should they calibrate the physician's advice? And also, this whole stuff about everything is possible, because both are right in their own way. How should I go about when living my life? Also, in terms of looking at the advancements that are happening at the same time. Help
Yeah,
us with this.
great question. Like I said, I have tremendous respect for physicians. I work with really, really good doctors and other providers, physical therapists, the rest. Here's the way I'd suggest you look at it. This is a huge, major problem with every patient I've ever met, that despite the efforts of their providers, they don't really understand their diagnosis and they don't understand treatment outcomes. So safety becomes the first answer to your question. You go like, okay, you might need to follow your doctor's advice, and I'm not telling you not to do that. But do you really understand? Do you really understand their diagnosis? Do you really understand the treatment interventions? Do you really understand how to even look at progress, or how to measure your potential, or how to set your expectations? It's more about making sure that if they tell you, like they told me, you better not do stuff, that's true. Now, in truth, I don't remember that my family ever had me see anybody else for a second opinion. So by all means, if you're being told that this is something, that's what it is, and just deal with it, make sure you get more than one opinion for sure. But more importantly, patients don't necessarily know the kinds of questions they need to ask that really probe. I was too young to do that. I just went on my own assumptions. But if you really probe this, there's a lot of techniques in the book. There's 2 chapters in the book about what to do with the medical profession, providers, and how to avoid these pitfalls. You do that and you kind of you investigate and go like, yeah, they're right. I've heard the same thing from 3 doctors. I've seen the studies. That didn't happen in my case. So I don't know that my case is a good example of when to go contrary to your doctors. That was more based on me being ornery and stubborn and not wanting to have to have anybody else tell me what to do, but due diligence, the same as you do in business, right? Look into this, study it, make sure you get the information, and then make an intelligent decision. But like I said, even if they tell you that you're limited, there's so many subtleties to this, AJ. So, for example, you have a back problem. It's hard to lift. It's hard to sit. It's hard to lay down. Your body starts to lose conditioning, right? And they go like, "Well, I can't exercise. I try and exercise, and it just hurts, right?" I go like, "Do you turn the doorknob? Yeah. Do you walk up the stairs? Yeah. You scratch your neck? Yeah." I said, "Well, there's something called isometrics. If I want to turn the doorknob and I'm tensing this part of my arm at the same time, I'm actually building this muscle and it's not going to flare me up, right? I may not have to be able to do certain things, but the idea of knowing that you can use ordinary activity, which doesn't require any more time than you're spending, may seem like a simple thing, but if people do this, they start practicing building muscle where they can, building conditioning where they can without flaring things up. But no doctor or PT has ever told my patients that, ever. I tell patients to treat life as an athletic event. So, for example, let's say if you mow the lawn or do the dishes, it's going to flare your back up. What I tell people to do is treat it like an athletic event. Before you do the dishes, do 10 or 15 minutes of stretching and warming up, like you were going to go play football. When you're finished with the activity, do a cool down. People think this is a silly idea, but it works, right? It works. You treat life as an athletic event, then what happens is you're building in more exercise, more stretching, making your activities more doable. If you see the way this works, a lot of it is practical, it's kind of logical, and you think that doctors are telling patients about this. They're telling what to do with this. That's why I wrote the book. Nobody's talking about any of this. Nobody's coming up with any of these solutions. Another example, you know how sometimes people are kept awake by worry? They have all those worry thoughts and they're just spinning around and it's keeping them awake. It's not just the pain at night. And sleep disruption is huge. Sleep disruption in chronic conditions can increase your pain by 50% and undermine your immune system. So what do I tell people to do to counter that? I tell them during the day or late in the afternoon, you sit down and make a list of everything you're worried about, everything. You rate the level of worry on a 0 to 10 scale. And a 10 would be you're about to be hit by a bus. And then you work on these techniques that I've told people to work down the anxiety as much as possible. And then if you're laying in bed and you want to think about it, go like, I already did. I don't need to think about it. Sounds strange, maybe, but it actually works. So part of this approach is practical. That's from my point of view, that's kind of a practical idea. Some of it is existential, which gets a bit more heady and difficult to understand. People begin to get introduced to the idea there are so many things you could be doing that nobody told you could do that could make a huge difference in your condition. Good example of things people don't pay attention to. How important is continuity in your life? The fact that every day is relatively the same, the sort of the same continuous certain things. Well, what happens when you lose that? What happens when you lose continuity and predictability? That is an existential impact. As human beings, I want a sense of continuity in my life. I want some level of predictability. Well, chronic conditions take that away. Every day is who knows? I don't know. So how do you deal with that, right? Well, one technique is, I'm sure you're aware of this. Chronic pain patients, they'll get up every day and want to do everything they want to do, right? And then if they don't get it done, they feel disappointed or worse. I tell them to use what's called plan A, B, C, D, E. You plan for doing everything, that's A. But if you find out you're limited, maybe it's plan B where you do less, or plan C where you do a few things, or plan E where you just lay in bed, but you never fail. You never fail because chronic pain patients have a sense of failure pretty much every day. In this model, you don't. You accommodate what you expect of yourself to the reality of the fact that what is going on with you is unpredictable. So those are just a sampling of some of the more practical and pragmatic approaches, but really addressing the issues.
Right, right, Dr. Allen. Let's come to your book. Who is this book for? New Possibilities: Unraveling the Mystery and Mastering Chronic Pain.
The book's for people in need. And even though it says pain on the cover, I couldn't think of any other way to say it because it's not necessarily about pain. It could be other physical symptoms. It might be emotional suffering. So people should understand the book is essentially written for people with chronic physical problems, but actually is relevant to anybody with chronic suffering. The book was written for the patients and their families and friends because they don't get it. The patients don't understand, other people don't understand. It's incredibly isolating to people and alienating because they don't know how to articulate it in a way that people will get it because they don't even understand what's going on with them. As soon as I tell them about this and they go through a 65-page intake packet, I go like, next time somebody says they don't get it, tell them to read the book. Right? Read the book. I didn't write it for doctors, although the doctors I work with really respect my work and included me in their work. But ask me if they've ever changed their practice. Even though they send patients to me, they love what I'm doing, they believe in the model. Ask me if they've changed their practice. Because a lot of
Right.
what I do can be incorporated into medical practice. The answer is they don't. And when I said, how come? What do you think the answer was? You're the specialist. I go, yeah. They go, yeah. So we send them to you. I go, that's fine. But you do know that half of what I'm doing should be in your intake, should be in your dialogue with patients. Well, but we don't do that. That's what you do. All right. So I made a decision a long time ago to not try and change the medical profession. I thought it was more important to empower the patients and their families because they're the ones at every appointment. And that if they're empowered and they're better able to get what they need from their providers, hopefully that's going to shift the way the system operates. The more proactive the providers are, it's kind of like democracy. If you don't vote, then what? Right? But if you come through the door and you're prepared to be vulnerable and assertive with doctors, you can get a lot more value out of it. And you're teaching them a lesson too. We need this. We need the opportunity to be vulnerable with you. We need the opportunity to be assertive and not be afraid you're going to fire us. Right? So that's kind of how I address that question, that you need to show the respect, but you also have a great deal of power. The book it's a resource guide. I don't suggest you try and read it as a book. You can go around that book in any place that feels relevant. But here's the main thing I'd like to say, AJ. You know, most patients, they are trained and conditioned in this society to think about the quick fix. Give me the pill, give me the surgery, give me the injection. And not to say those things can't be helpful. But this book says, well, if you want to be able to master this, all you have to do is evolve and go through a process of self-development. I don't know that the average person is looking at that and going, yeah, years of self-development, or maybe I can find a pill. It's a tough choice, right? Until they know something clearly. Every session you have in this model is going to produce change. You're going to get instant benefit. You don't have to wait years to become a different person before that happens. The minute people get introduced to a lot of these ideas, it changes everything. So it's more about engaging people in it. And I don't know that the book standing alone can do that enough, which is why we are going to be launching a full-scale program of self-education and live webinars to much more intensely approach this and answer questions. You read that book, there's a lot of mind-bending ideas in that book for most people. And you don't have me sitting there to go like, that's what that really means. Existential immune system, interesting idea, but what the heck is that? So that's who the book was written for, to make sure that if people want to really understand what's going on, it's out there. And as far as I know, AJ, there is no other book out there that approaches it this way. No other practitioner who approaches it this way.
Absolutely, Dr. Allen. So, how do you master something called chronic pain when it's also a mystery? So, do you look at it as a mystery to solve, or something that needs to be solved with evolution and evolve and understand it? That's my last question to you.
Okay, good question. The mystery, as I said in the earlier part of this, is understood when you begin to realize there's so many things that are happening that are influencing this. You go like, not so mysterious anymore. You know, I'm in a meeting with the doctor and I say my pain's at an 8 and he says it should be a 4. But he doesn't tell me that I have sleep disruption, I've lost physical conditioning, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So the mystery is revealed in understanding how many things are affecting the pain. It's also revealed in doing your due diligence and investigating your condition. And then it stops being mysterious. I know exactly what's going on with my back. I know exactly what treatments are doing and why they'll work or not work. I know exactly what to expect in terms of pain because I did my due diligence. So it's a combination of investigating what's actually going on and exploring all the things that are influencing it. And then the mystery is revealed, which is how you move from the mystery to the mastery.
Absolutely. Well explained, Dr. Ellen. And I'm sure there is a lot of things that people can learn from you about chronic pain management and also about how they should understand pain. So, what is the best way for people to learn more about you, from you, also get hold of your book?
Okay, the simplest approach is to go to our website, which is newoptionsinc.com. You can always send me an email at Weisser@newoptionsinc.com. I would say those are the two best ways. Certainly take a look at the book. There is a self-study, including a workbook that goes with the book coming out in September. There's going to be these online webinars for people to really get into question and answer and get into depth on it. We prepared a series of videos explaining the model that will be available in September. So if you go through the website, it's all going to be connected there. And use my email if you want to contact me directly. And here's one last thought about this. I can work with people without being their therapist. This is in a large measure educational. So if you want to consult with me on this approach from an educational perspective, it doesn't matter what country or part of the country you live in. It's not a question of licensing, right? Whether that's going to be covered by insurance or not, I'm not quite sure about that part. But the information is available, and you don't have to be concerned that if you don't live in Washington State, where I live, that you couldn't talk to me. So if this is appealing to anybody, if they really get what I'm telling you today, get a hold of me. I'm more than happy to consult with people. I'm not going to charge them to do that because a lot of people need to be oriented and have questions answered. There's also a lot of information on the website. There's a number of podcasts I've done that are available through that. So I would say that's the best way to sort of directly go to it. And I would definitely pay attention because there's lots of new things coming with this in the near future. This needs to be a program, not just me working with people. And that program development has been under works for the last 2 years. It will be launched this fall. It's very exciting, actually. It's one of the reasons why I'm doing more podcasts. I want people know there are resources out there you may be unaware of. And also, one last thought, support groups for chronic pain do not have a technology like AA has a technology. This is a technology. This is a teachable technology. If you had a support group with this technology, trust me, it would produce outcomes you would not see with any current support groups because they don't have a treatment model. They have advice, they have experience, it's great. They have different approaches, but none of it does this. This can do that, the same thing that AA does as a technology.
Absolutely. Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.